the best.
Thomas Cameron's great. Brett Huntley. David Bush, John Chester.
Death watch. The order to execute Saddam Hussein could come at any moment. American troops in Iraq poised for what could be a violent reaction. In his own words, surprising new information about how former President Ford felt about the Republican Party and his successors. Wild weather. Looking back on a most unusual year for weather. Is it a warning about the future? And making a difference. An American saving the lives of street children who had no hope.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. Substituting tonight, Campbell Brown.
Good evening. An announcement could come at any time tonight. Saddam Hussein, we are told, is in his final hours, soon to be executed by hanging. This will truly mark the end of his violent and repressive reign, but by no means the end of violence in Iraq. U.S. military forces are tonight on a heightened state of alert, ready for whatever the reaction. NBC's Richard Engel is live in Baghdad with the latest. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Campbell. NBC News has learned that Saddam Hussein will be executed here in Baghdad before sunrise. Iraqi officials who will witness his hanging are already gathered to see Saddam's final moments.
As Saddam Hussein awaits his execution, just a few miles away tonight, we met the man waiting to oversee Saddam's hanging. It could happen any time. Everything is ready, he said. All the legal steps have been taken. Dressed in a suit, keeping himself awake with strong coffee, ready for the call. Munir al-Haddad, a father of two, now lives in the U.S. guarded green zone for his protection. Haddad was one of the first judges to interrogate Saddam a year ago. He has survived 4 assassination attempts since then. I could never have imagined Saddam's execution, he said, not even in my dreams. Iraq's prime minister said the execution would take place without delay. Tonight, Iraqi TV stations began preparing the public. A Shiite station showed nothing but clips of the Saddam regime's abuses and images of Saddam with a noose in front of him. But Sunni websites shot back, tonight threatening violence in response to Saddam's execution. But not all Sunnis support him. After all, Saddam lost the war and his country.
Even the Sunnis hate him because he is the guy who is responsible for ending the Sunni rule in Iraq.
In Baghdad today, it's easy to see why so many Iraqis want revenge. At an auto repair shop, Ali Salim, a Shiite we interviewed at random, said Saddam's security forces killed 27 members of his family. In a nearby coffee shop, Haji Allah said, when Saddam was executing people, he never asked for anyone's approval.
Tonight, it appears, Campbell, that the former Iraqi president is facing his final moments. Campbell?
And Richard, there has been a lot of confusion about who's really in charge of this execution. Is it the Iraqis or is it the Americans?
We're told, Campbell, that Saddam Hussein will never fully be out of American control, that Iraqi officials and American observers will remain on hand right until the very end to make sure that Saddam is never humiliated or tortured before he's hanged. Campbell?
And Richard, talk to us about the big picture, what this means for the Iraqi government that has operated in the shadow of Saddam Hussein and has not been able to control the violence.
Absolutely, Campbell. For so long, Saddam Hussein has cast such a long shadow over the Iraqi government and really the Iraqi people. The Iraqi government has said it could never feel fully independent with Saddam still alive. However, few here expect that Saddam's death will do anything to reduce the violence in this country. In fact, it could spike in the short term. Campbell?
Richard Engel in Baghdad tonight. Richard, thank you. Joining me now from the President's Ranch in Crawford, Texas, NBC White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. And Kelly, I'm sure the White House is following all this very closely.
Absolutely, Campbell. President Bush knows all about the plans for the execution of Saddam Hussein. Advisors described that, saying he was briefed about the entire process as a part of his intelligence briefing. They won't talk about timing or specifics, partly because they want this to be viewed as the work of the Iraqi government and as an example that Iraq is forming a new judicial system. But on the security front, U.S. officials are braced for the possibility that Saddam's death could cause more violence. Advisors responded to that concern, saying that extremists would use any excuse. Campbell?
And Kelly, a different topic, but there was severe weather in Texas today, a tornado warning, and the president had somewhat of a scare. What happened?
Well, the president, the first lady, and their 2 dogs were moved out of their house, placed in an armored vehicle, and taken to a tornado shelter. They didn't have to go inside, but they were in that shelter, sheltered for a short time, and the whole weather scare passed after a few minutes. But there was a tornado warning on the ranch property.
All right. Kelly O'Donnell for us from Crawford, Texas tonight. Kelly, thank you. And now to Southern California and the beginning of 6 days of public mourning for former President Gerald Ford. His body was brought to the church in the Ford's adopted home of Palm Desert. NBC's George Lewis joins me now with more. George.
Campbell, President Ford lies in repose at this hour inside St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. Throughout tonight and into tomorrow morning, thousands of people are expected to file past his casket. On a sunny desert afternoon, Gerald Ford made one last journey to the church where he and his wife Betty have worshiped for the past 30 years. Mrs. Ford, making her first public appearance since her husband's death on Tuesday, was there to receive the casket, as were her children, grandchildren, and other family members. Inside the church, the Reverend Robert Certain, the Ford family pastor, offered a blessing.
With faith in Jesus Christ, we receive the body of our brother Gerald for burial.
Tonight, the church will remain open all night long so that President Ford's friends and neighbors and members of the public can pay their respects. Jay Magnus and his son Aaron were the first in line to catch the shuttle buses to the church.
We want to show respect for the office. We want to show respect to the country.
I feel that since I have the ability to come here and spend time to pay my respects to President Ford, that it was my duty to come out here and do so.
This begins 6 days of funeral ceremonies as Betty Ford, Gerald Ford's wife of 58 years, says goodbye to the love of her life, and the nation joins her in mourning. Tomorrow, the Ford family will accompany the casket to Washington, D.C., where President Bush and other dignitaries will pay their respects. Then on Wednesday of next week, Mr. Ford will be buried in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Campbell?
George Lewis for us from California tonight. NBC News will provide live coverage of the state funeral for former President Ford at the Capitol tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and of the funeral services at the National Cathedral in Washington Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Brian Williams will anchor here on this NBC station. And we'll have more on President Ford in depth tonight. The first look at an exclusive interview with some surprisingly blunt comments on how he felt about the direction of his Republican Party. In Denver today, it has been a 1-2 punch this holiday season. The city is being clobbered by another heavy snowfall, with a huge storm moving through right after the one that paralyzed the area during Christmas. So how is this storm affecting the travel this holiday weekend? NBC's Leanne Gregg joins us from Denver. Leanne?
Campbell, this storm was predicted days in advance, so additional snow plows were put on the roads early. Still, Colorado is reeling from this double holiday punch. In the Denver suburbs, Jim Villeneuve. Snow and 40-mile-an-hour winds southeast of Denver. Campbell?
Leanne Gregg from Denver tonight, thanks. Now to Wall Street, where stocks fell back a bit on this last trading day of the year, and a very good year it was. The Dow was down just over 38 points on the day today in quiet trading. The Nasdaq lost a bit more than 10 points on the day, but for the year, the blue chips were up a total of 1,745 points. That's a gain of more than 16%. The Nasdaq was up just under 210 points for the year. That's 9.5% for 2006. The markets will be closed on Tuesday as part of the National Day of Mourning. It's a tradition on Wall Street to close for presidential funerals, but it will be the first time there's been no trading for 4 days straight since 9/11. There will also be no mail service on Tuesday, with federal agencies closed to honor the former president as well. When Nightly News continues on this Friday evening, in depth, how did former President Gerald Ford really feel about his party and his successors? An exclusive first look at a candid interview. And later, an American making a difference in the most profound way for hundreds of forgotten children.
The award-winning documentary, Supersize Me.
My advice to you as a physician is that you've got to stop. You're going to die.
Supersize Me premieres tomorrow only on MSNBC.
NBC News in depth tonight. On the record, more revelations from Gerald Ford in an exclusive interview made public here for the first time. It's an incredibly candid conversation offering some tantalizing revelations and tough talk from Mr. Ford aimed at former President George Herbert Walker Bush and former First Lady Barbara Bush, also at Ronald Reagan and other members of the Republican inner circle. Here's NBC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell in depth.
As the Republican Party turned harder to the right, Gerald Ford felt increasingly isolated. In 1995, he told historian Michael Beschloss for Newsweek.
We felt very uncomfortable at the last convention. And I think unless things change, we'll feel uncomfortable in the next one.
The interview, to be published in Newsweek Sunday, lifts the curtain on the private Gerald Ford, plain talking and very critical of other Republicans, Nixon, Reagan, and the first President Bush. Ford on former President Bush's stated opposition to abortion.
I was disappointed that George didn't fight a little harder against the hard right. I know damn well that he and Barbara are pro-choice, individual.
Barbara Bush has acknowledged being in favor of abortion rights. Former President Bush told Newsweek Ford was wrong about him. Ford was even tougher on Ronald Reagan, who ran against Ford in the 1976 primaries and then campaigned for him only once.
If he had made an appearance in Ohio, if he had made an appearance in Louisiana, Mississippi, we would have won, I'm sure.
What I was surprised by was how deeply he felt stung by the movement of the Republican Party to what he called the hard right. He came back to that again and again.
Ford also revealed to Newsweek and the Washington Post a closer friendship with Richard Nixon than was previously known, and new details about the Nixon pardon. The Nixon-Ford friendship apparent in recorded telephone conversations Bob Woodward played for Ford 2 years ago. In May 1973, at the height of Watergate, Nixon calls Ford, still the House Republican leader, and pleads for help.
Keep the faith and tell the guys to get off their and start fighting back.
Well, anytime you want me to do anything, under any circumstances, you give me a call.
A year later, he knew Nixon had deceived him. Why didn't he demand that Nixon admit guilt before pardoning him? Ford told Beschloss and Newsweek
that Nixon was adamant. I felt so strongly that I had to get this damn thing off my desk. Nitpicking about what he was going to say became less and less important.
The drama of Watergate and Jerry Ford's role continues to unfold, even as Ford begins his last journey home. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
When Nightly News continues this Friday, a year of wild weather. What happened, and are we in for more?
I saw a woman who was
for President Ford. Plus, Tim Russert and his guests look ahead to the new year and the 2008 presidential election, only on Meet the Press.
On this last business day of the year, the federal government has cleared the way for the biggest merger ever in the telecommunications industry. In a unanimous decision, the FCC approved AT&T's $86 billion buyout of Bell South. AT&T had to make several major concessions to allow the deal to go through. Even with back-to-back snowstorms in Denver, 2006 is set to go down as the second or third warmest year on record. In fact, this year, the average temperature in the 48 contiguous United States was 2 degrees warmer than normal. NBC's Tom Costello takes a look tonight at what climatologists say could be the new normal.
Just days after word that polar bears may be threatened with extinction, dramatic news from Canada. Confirmation that an ice chunk for the last 15 years, so southern plants are now moving north. And irises that are supposed to bloom in the spring are now completely confused.
Flowers are opening. Every day we see things coming out.
NBC News, Washington.
We'll be right back with a man making a difference for hundreds of street kids.
Following is a cable news fact check. Fact, fewer people are watching Fox News. Fact, fewer people are watching CNN. Fact, more people are watching MSNBC. Okay, show the numbers. There they are. Numbers don't lie. We're up, they're down, and that's a fact. See for yourself why more people are watching MSNBC. Thank you.
Time now for our Friday Making a Difference report. Tonight, an American taking on the challenge of helping some of the most vulnerable children in the world. They're Brazil's street children, abandoned and quite frankly hopeless, until one person said enough. As NBC's Bob Faw tells us tonight, he is making a difference in a most profound way.
In a land that's beautiful and wealthy.
And that is our broadcast for this Friday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Campbell Brown, and a reminder to join Brian Williams tomorrow night at 6:30 Eastern for coverage of the state funeral for former President Ford. And I will see you tomorrow morning on Today. Have a good night, everybody.
Saturday on Today. What do you do behind the wheel? Are you on the road to trouble? How not to be a distracted driver. Only on Today on
Next.
Julia Roberts pregnant again. What she's telling a...
This is an NBC News special report. Here is Campbell Brown.
Good evening, everyone. Iraq's former dictator Saddam Hussein has been executed. That is according to 3 Arab-language television stations and Reuters news service. He was hanged inside Baghdad's fortified green zone just a short time ago. The execution carried out despite last-minute legal appeals to a court here in the U.S. American forces across Iraq are bracing for a possible violent reaction to the execution, and we should say that NBC News is not going to broadcast videotape of the execution. Richard Engel is joining us now from Baghdad with more. Richard, what can you tell us?
Good morning, Campbell. These 3 normally very credible Arabic language news stations are all reporting that approximately 15 minutes ago, Saddam Hussein was brought to the execution chamber, led to the gallows, and then executed. This is also being reported by the Reuters news agency. At this stage, that is all that we have been told, but this is according to a schedule that was put forward by the Iraqi government. They said this execution would take place around this time before daybreak here in Baghdad, Campbell.
And Richard, this is obviously an emotional event for the people of Iraq. We mentioned U.S. forces on high alert. What kind of reaction are people anticipating?
Iraqis are waking up early. Many of them are following these events very closely. We've been told that Iraqis are staying in their homes watching this on television and that our U.S. forces are on high alert. Campbell?
All right, Richard Engel for us in Baghdad, repeating the breaking news at this hour. Former dictator Saddam Hussein has been executed according to 3 Arab stations. We will have more coming up on later tonight.